Thanks everybody for opening the room up. Appreciate that. And we will start before we get into talk and some discussion with just a 15-minute meditation. So encouragement is to just really, you came all this way, find any way to be that feels good for you for the next 15 minutes or so. We of course have chairs back there too if you would prefer. Don't hesitate if you'd like to move. And setting an intention as we kind of settle in here to just really set down having to be anybody, having to be a meditator, whatever that looks like, or really perform or do anything or be anyone at all. Take any pressure off of the mind. And you can close your eyes if that feels good, or you can also just rest your gaze at this nice floor we have in front of us. So starting with a few longer, slower, deeper breaths just to help the body and the mind arrive just at any rhythm or pace that feels good for you. Sometimes it can feel good to breathe out through the mouth a little bit, or even breathe a little deeper into the belly. And then just allowing the breath to find a natural rhythm. So as you feel ready, letting go of any control over the breath and just allowing the body to breathe just as it wants to. Just noticing, how do you know that you're breathing right now? In the most simple way. We'll use this breath as a through line for the meditation. So just familiarizing yourself with the breath as it is right now, whether it's long or short or deep or shallow. The foundation of mindfulness is always non-judgment, acceptance. And allowing the thinking mind to really just fall to the background. So not pushing it away, not trying to force the mind not to think, just shifting our priorities to really be here for what's happening in the body and in the breath. And starting at the top of the head, just really relaxing any tension that's there in the scalp, or the forehead, or the brow. And even the eyes, just letting the eyes relax in the sockets. And the muscles of the mind, the thinking muscles, maybe the brain, almost softening from the inside out in the head. And also the jaw, just noticing if the jaw is being held, the tongue. And allowing the shoulder blades to relax, to come together a little bit, which can open up the chest so the body can breathe a little easier. And feeling the weight of the upper arms, the lower arms, and the hands. Just feeling this weight of gravity. Sense of groundedness, connection. Breathing through the chest, softening the muscles of the upper chest, the stomach, the lower belly, and the abdomen. Middle of a work week here for some people. Just noticing if there's any protective layers in this kind of front part of the torso. And to whatever degree you feel comfortable, just inviting in a sense of safety, letting down the guard. And scanning downwards into this lower half of the body, which can sometimes feel kind of disconnected. So noticing the weight, the sit bones connecting to the cushion. Noticing the legs on the mat. And relaxing. So the upper legs, the thighs, down through the knees, the shins, the calves, all the way through the feet and the toes. Let's just spend a minute here just breathing into and from the legs. So this awareness rooted in the lower half of the body. Just kind of visualizing the oxygen from each inhalation moving and expanding into this lower half of the body. And then just expanding the awareness to really include the whole body. So what is it like to know the body is breathing from the body? Sometimes this word, the mind, can have connotations of being in the head or the brain. But often what we're tapping into in meditation is the awareness, this knowing quality of the mind, which extends through the nervous system, through every limb of the body. It can be really grounding for the mind to drop into just this simple, open, receptive, embodied awareness. Letting the breath be like a through line through the meditation. So weaving its way, always there. And we can use this to help anchor the mind, just to give it something to do. noticing the quality of the mind. Even just 10 minutes of meditation here, just noticing the quality of this presence of mind. This kind of ground of awareness, or sometimes called the groundless ground. Presence of mind that has been there for this entire life, and through which every thought comes and goes. So really tuning in to this groundless ground of awareness. Doesn't need to be manufactured or produced. But through mindfulness can be a source of rest. Can be a refuge. Beneath all of the ideas about self or planning, there's this kind of wordless wisdom. And in mindfulness practice, we're just learning to trust this accepting and receptive quality of mind, which innately holds so many of the values shared before we started. Quality of curiosity, quality of compassion or connection, and a deep knowing in the bones of what is true and beautiful and just and kind. Spending another minute or two in silence. Recognizing this may be the formal end to the meditation, but it doesn't have to be the end of this quality of presence of mind. So I'll share some thoughts. I'm going to try to keep it relatively brief and leave plenty of time for discussion. So we've been talking about something called the Eightfold Path. This is like one of the most central Buddhist teachings, and yeah, it's kind of like the Buddha's most famous record or something like that. He talked about it a lot. And a central component to that is what's called wise livelihood. So he saw a central aspect of like practicing mindfulness is like bringing it into whatever one does with their days. And the general encouragement is like engaging in work that doesn't cause harm and aligns with some of the overall qualities, practice of meditation, compassion, wisdom, bringing those things into what one does on a daily basis. And I think livelihood or work can, especially living in a capitalist society, take up a lot of time. So a large area to practice in, if it's however many hours a week. And so it's kind of like a big opportunity to, bring mindfulness off the cushion into daily life. And I was reflecting on this coming into this evening and realizing like, God, this is such a big, as a therapist, this is such a big thing that I talk about with clients. It's such a central topic, is like tension in the workplace, arguments, not getting a promotion, trying to find work that's meaningful and valuable. So it's something I've realized that's really important to people. Surprise, surprise. And so, yeah, I'm kind of excited to talk about some of the ways of bringing mindfulness, applying kind of like Buddhist psychology and principles to it. So I'm going to just briefly reflect on kind of the roots in like the Buddhist suttas on livelihood, and then spend most of the time talking about some more modern interpretations and like practical applications of that. So, I know I'm always saying like, God, this is teachings from like 2,500 years ago, 2,600 years ago, and like totally rings to or really resonates. And often that does. And I think this does, but it might feel a little bit out of date in some way. So the Buddha's main teachings on livelihood was 5 types of livelihoods to avoid. Always a list of some number, right? Trading in weapons, trading in human beings, slavery, selling meat, selling intoxicants, and selling poisons. So not totally irrelevant, obviously, definitely relevant and still practical. Maybe not to everybody, though. I hope probably not as relevant. But so it can seem a bit distant, but I was reflecting on this like, wow, I was a bartender for over 10 years, selling intoxicants. And, this is no judgment on the profession at all, but in hindsight, I can recognize the way that impacted my life in a big way, actually. Especially serving people who got out of hand or were clearly, alcoholics, and recognizing that part of my daily life was contributing to that, And so I think that took its toll on me in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways was definitely drinking heavily and noticing how, for me, when I got sober, the first thing I realized I had to do was like step out of that profession, actually. It was going to really be helpful to remove myself from that environment. And it had a really huge impact on my life. So the broader principle, rather than just avoiding these 5 things, at least in terms of modern interpretation, is trying to find livelihood that is free from harm to oneself and others, as kind of just a more general principle of it. A teacher, Gil Fronsdale, that I follow quite closely, talks about right livelihood as inner and outer integrity, having this kind of cohesion between inner values and how one functions in work on a daily basis. And that's another thing that I do with clients. Usually in first sessions, I do like a card sort, a values card sort, and go through 70 different values narrow them down to the top 10, and then narrow them down to really what are the most important things. Because it can be so helpful to figure out what those things are, so then the work we can do can be aligned with what those values are for that particular person. So I think it's possible to do a really similar thing with work and try to assess. You know, I mean, there's so many different work assessments and career assessments you can do. But the one thing I love, he shares this quote. He says, right livelihood is not just about avoiding harmful professions, but about bringing mindfulness and ethical clarity to whatever work we do. So I kind of appreciate that. There's the shift of focus, not so much being just about the type of job, but like the quality of showing up for that job on a daily basis. And I think maybe it makes it a bit more relevant too. You know, kind of gets away from this idea of like some jobs being more spiritual than others or something like that. And I know for me, a big part of that is like, you know, I can start my day with meditation, but when I get off the cushion and I get to work, is that completely gone in the first few hours? Because often it can be, depending on what's happening, difficult conversations. So this is a practice of bringing that through line of all these central components of mindfulness, of curiosity, compassionate, trying to bring those things into the workplace. Another teacher, Gregory Kramer, he wrote a book, I'll pass it around a little bit later here when we do a discussion, and talks about right livelihood as relational awareness. He says, right livelihood is deeply relational. It's not just about what we do, but how our work affects others and the systems we participate in. So livelihood doesn't have to be separate or different from spiritual practice, but actually can be an extension of it. And I found myself just like really appreciating that perspective and realizing it's not something I've really tried on a regular basis or something that I practice that regularly. I think so much of my life has felt like I'm just getting my job done so I can do the things that I want to do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, per se, but also realizing in some ways it's a missed opportunity because it's such a big chunk of my week every week. So I was really appreciating that perspective of like, how can livelihood or work be an extension of spiritual practice? And a lot of people that I know and people that I've worked with who've been through incredibly difficult things, prison, long-term addictions, things like that. And I found that working closely with some of these people, it's really inspiring seeing someone step into a job and have such a deep sense of gratitude for it. Someone who is incarcerated for a long time or is coming out of years of addiction. And it's kind of rubbed off on me in a way of just like noticing this appreciation and how it's lighting up someone's life. And obviously, I know that's maybe an idealized version of work, and it's not always like that. But I've noticed how certain people really bring values and purpose into that workplace. The last teacher I wanted to quote is Tuweri Sala, who, as a part of Black History Month, we spent a whole session just talking about her teachings. She's one of my personal favorite teachers. And she talks about right livelihood as liberation from oppression. She says, right livelihood is a way we can resist and transform oppressive systems while staying true to our practice. So she says that right livelihood isn't just about personal ethics in the workplace, but it's actually about reducing systemic harm in workplaces and in the workplace in larger society. And this was a really central part of the way the Buddha carried his own livelihood and community through, offering teachings not just to certain people, but in a caste system, abolishing the caste system within the community and saying actually people who were in the lowest caste or were beggars or prostitutes or whatever it was are going to be practicing right alongside people from the wealthiest caste. And in that, bringing those values into what he did, into his livelihood. And so I think there's some challenges of ethical livelihood in a capitalist society, honestly. Overworked, not being paid fairly, so many things that can come up. And I think one thing for me personally that I've just been working on is just recognizing how that can impact work-life balance and burnout, and feeling like I don't even realize I'm doing it, but getting caught in hustling and hustling and hustling, and not recognizing the impact that that's having on me, taking on more and more at times. And Tuere also talks about bringing a mindfulness and awareness into workspaces, especially those that uphold harmful systems. And that mindfulness can be a form of resistance and transformation. So recognizing injustice, not just living by personal ethical values, but also recognizing unfairness in the workplace and advocating for others as well. So I really appreciated that perspective. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is just like some practical applications of doing this. And so like how to bring mindfulness into work. And one way of doing that is just bringing presence of mind into like ethical decision making into on a daily basis. I have one client that I work with, and she talks about how the first thing she does is before her workday is she's strong setting her intention, and she does a spiritual practice like as she's going to work, basically. And I was really inspired by that. It's kind of as I touched on earlier, like what intention can play such a powerful role. So like if there's a mindfulness practice in the morning, or even if there's not time to actually meditate, what is the power of intention as you come into the workday? And I know that can sometimes change very quickly depending on how difficult the day is, but can be really a powerful practice. And then skillful engagement. So navigating maybe difficult moments, difficult conversations. This teacher, Gregory Kramer, he talks about bringing deep listening and ethical speech into professional settings, into work. And one of the main practices he talks about, he has like a really popular form of it's called insight dialogue, and it's a interpersonal mindfulness practice. And so he helps people, support people in conversations. And one of the main practices is pausing and relaxing, especially in difficult moments. And I know that that can sound maybe like simple and obvious, but not always easy to do. And it can be like a really powerful way when things are starting to escalate, to take that moment, to recognize what's happening. Am I about to speak through anger? Am I about to react rather than respond? So really bringing in the actual skills of meditation itself into daily life, into work. And then bringing compassion into work, service, leadership, finding ways to integrate kindness into professional roles. And that's not always easy, again. But I think that's where the intention setting can be powerful, and having small opportunities to try to, again, take practices such as loving kindness, compassion off the cushion into interactions, whether that's with a client or a coworker or a boss, whoever that is. And again, compassion doesn't always mean just being passive and accepting what's happening. Often compassion means actually setting firm boundaries, standing up for yourself, but doing so in a way that feels aligned with core values. And then the last thing I wanted to say is I think there's also value in considering work and how it aligns with values, the job itself, And I don't think this means everyone needs to go out and change their job, but worthwhile to consider because it takes up so much time in a day, just recognizing some of those values we talked about earlier, if the work that we're doing feels like it's fulfilling or checking those boxes. And then I'm just going to say one more thing, too, in this category, because there's another thought, which is extending consumption, being a part of livelihood, right? Bringing mindfulness to products, where they're made, how employees are being treated, can be a really valuable way and really a powerful way to use money and expenditures. And I also recognize that there can be, some privilege in that, and that's not always a choice in how that money's spent. But definitely can be a good practice just to be aware of where things are coming from. Okay, so Eightfold Path, and the main purpose of this kind of, we've been on this for about 5 or 6 weeks, is to really bring meditation off the cushion into all these aspects of daily life: speech, actions, work, and livelihood really being encouraging an examination of how I show up on a daily basis. Remembering kind of what some of those values are related to work, using practices like intention setting to kind of keep that practice alive, especially in days where it may be difficult. And just bringing some of those skills that we talked about, mindfulness, compassion, into workplace, into conversations at work. And I wanted to end with a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. He said, "Our vocation can nourish our understanding and compassion, or it can erode them. We should be awake to the consequences far and near of the way we earn our living. Right livelihood is not just about choosing a job. It's about bringing mindfulness, compassion, and understanding into whatever work we do."